The U.S. economy is in big time trouble, and Africans are bearing the brunt of this crisis at this point. Although a lot of people are going to pay prices. It's much more than what people understand. And one reason it's much more is because a lot of what's happening to African people is not being reported as something that's happening to African people. You hear in general terms about people losing homes, the subprime mortgages, etc. So I'm looking at something now that reports on this question, and this is something that's from something called Black Agenda Radio, and it reads that the subprime lending debacle should cause massive rethinking among those who have long proclaimed that the route to black equality is through wealth accumulation. And so it talks about how the greatest, that the catastrophic losses inflicted on blacks and Latinos in the U.S. at the hands of predatory lenders has resulted in the greatest loss of wealth to people of color in modern U.S. history. It says that with more than half of blacks in many cities caught in the subprime trap, more than half of Africans. And it says that the prospect of African people to amass wealth has grown bleaker than at any time in living memory. At the current rate, it will take 5,423 years for blacks to achieve homeowner parity with whites. It says, now standing at about 10-1, the wealth gap between African Americans, quote, and white medium households cannot but grow bigger in the wake of the subprime lending catastrophe. So right now, the gap is 10 white people, a home, medium home on wealth is 10 times greater right now than not 10% greater, but 10 times greater than Africans right now, and it's going to grow worse. And then it talks about how banks and other lending institutions, see, because you know that people complain about these go and borrow on your paycheck joints that you can find in every African community here, and how they are usurious and just take people's money and stuff like that. Here it says that banks and other lending institutions, these are not those joints up there on 34th, right? Not those ones that usually pointed at. Banks and other lending institutions trap blacks and Latinos in predatory lending schemes as a matter of policy. As a matter of policy. Says that in city after city, a solid majority of subprime loan recipients were people of color. The very scope of the crime proves that the lending crisis is not a product of black culture, quote unquote, because like people blamed Africans for the thing, right? But the result of calculated policies near uniformly carried out by virtually all of the nation's mortgage lending institutions. But almost all of them were involved in it. I told you, the whole subprime mortgage thing was something that was designed specifically for Africans and other people who are colonized in this country. It says the wealth loss is staggering. People of color have collectively lost between $164 billion to $213 billion over the past 8 years, with Latinos losing slightly more than African Americans. Before the crisis hit, it was estimated that it would take 594 years, more than half a millennium, for blacks to catch up with whites in household wealth. See, this is even before the crisis. They were talking about it would take almost 600 years for us to catch up, right? And now, in the aftermath of the home mortgage massacre, it could take 10 times as long, more than 5,000 years. And they talk about how, quote unquote, people of color are more than 3 times more likely to have subprime loans. So Cleveland has become a poster child of the subprime crisis. And what this is because it's the cities with the majority African populations where you see huge amounts of people who have lost their homes. Cleveland has become a poster child of the subprime crisis in a country where some 2.1 million borrowers are behind on their mortgage payments. And the city of Cleveland has responded by suing lenders, accusing them of targeting black borrowers and steering them to the loans granted with a few formalities and at hefty interest rates to people with poor credit histories. And Cleveland, Detroit, Baltimore, those are the cities, some of the cities hit hard. And of course, these are cities with large, huge African populations. In the hardest hit suburb of Cleveland, nearly 24,000 people have lost their homes. So that's what you need to know. And you need to know this also in the face of this current election campaign that's going on. Because even, like part of a whole counterinsurgency policy all over the world has been, like for the government to kill off revolutionaries. And at the same time, they're killing off revolutionaries to raise up these other kinds of organizations as false solutions. In this city, what they did at the height of the struggle, when Jomo was here, they created an organization called, what was this organization that was downtown at the Chamber of Commerce? They created an organization with David Welch was a part of it. What am I thinking about? No, it wasn't no biracial advisory thing. It was like white people and some Negroes, and it was in the meeting, they met at the Chamber of Commerce.
It's the same thing.
They met at the Chamber of Commerce, and this was at a time where not only was Jomo was the driving force, but even the NAACP was acting militant in this city. And so everything was out of hand. The sanitation workers were in struggle. So they went and created an organization, and they've done that all over the world. So when struggle gets real serious, they kill off, they murder leaders and stuff like that, and then raise up these substitute organizations that pretend to be standing for something. They killed Dedan Kimathi in Kenya, who headed the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, and then raised up Jomo Kenyatta. They did that stuff all over the world and put these phony organizations, and now they're making this terrible aggression against African people. Look at the thousands of people who are losing homes just to this. It's not like an accident. You're talking about corporations make policy determinations to steal the money, to rip African people off, take everything. People have had these ideas. They've been tricked. They're tricked by people like these little Negroes up there on 9th Street, on Martin Luther King, with their little housing situation, who preach that this is the way to get your equity, because you want to send your children to school and buy a house, etc. And now the Africans, I forgot the billions of dollars just in equity that the Africans have lost, since the so-called subprime mortgage crisis. So even as all of this stuff is happening to us, and coupled with every other crisis, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, this is what you really must understand, that when you're looking at this so-called subprime mortgage crisis, you must understand the implications that it has for other areas of the economy.